Hello and welcome to episode 24 of Buxton Barrow Man, where I go through Buxton's history and clean up the town at the same time. Today I'll be talking about the Peak District, its boundaries, and a little about what it is. But first, a little look back at the episode I made about a railway line coming to the peaks. The video did very well and it stirred all sorts of comments, which is great. However, some of the comments appeared that intrigued me, and they're not related to the train line in the video, they're more focused on the comment that I made, that it was coming to Buxton. Which to me, I know is obviously not in the Peak District. And after doing some research, I can tell you that I'm both correct and incorrect. So I'll try my best to explain, because it's all a little wishy-washy for a lack of a better term. To start explaining, I have to talk about what the Peak District is, and immediately this is the main issue and why it's so all over the place. Because to me, being a local, and for most of my life commuting and going to school in the Peaks, the Peak District is just the national park. I'll explain later why this might be wrong. But the national park boundaries are outlined here, drawn up and officially designated as Britain's first national park from April 17th, 1951, and when making out the boundaries for the park, the main focus was to include the most southern part of the Pennine Moors and a substantial part of the lovely rolling hills of Derbyshire. This was slightly conflicting because although Derbyshire can be very beautiful, it's also very industrial. Derby being the birthplace to the modern factory, lots of the county industrialised quickly with mills as well as huge holes in the ground, also known as quarries, and mining and quarrying is a huge part of the history here in Derbyshire. And the national park does include many locations that once were mines and quarries, such as my old workplace, Speedwell Cavern. Over time, the factories and mills have closed and found more appealing lives. The mines have closed, well, all but one, and interesting pretty scars on the landscape remain from those older mines. But the quarries, they have prevailed. The limestone under the peaks are of such high quality, Buxton is home to one of the largest limestone quarries in Europe and produces over 6 million tonnes of limestone products annually. That being Tunstead, and it's not the only quarry around, we have loads of them. And so, although Buxton might have been considered a pleasant enough place with lots of history ripe to be a part of the Peak District National Park, it had to be avoided. The industry here is too active and too important to be plonked into a national park. As although businesses and people live happily and thrive in the park, it does create some huge headaches in planning and constant environmental concerns. Although I do have to point out a very weird exception, that being Hope Cement Plant. This odd behemoth of a cement plant has been swallowed up by the park, meaning it follows stricter air pollution rules, as well as a commitment to vastly prioritise haulage via rail rather than road, and has stayed a very viable plant throughout. I believe it was just way too central to make an exception to exclude the quarry and its surrounding areas. After all, it is in the gorgeous Hope Valley. So that's why Buxton and the surrounding areas makes this sort of valley carving its way through the national park, where we're just excluded from the club. And now I'll try and explain why it is also in the Peak District, but it's not, but it is, but it isn't. Yeah, I'm being vague because there is no solid information online, no borders, no boundaries, it's only mentioned in passing. But this is the boundaries of the peaks that I've edited to exist from descriptions of the Peak District that I found online, and funnily enough, there seems to be a link to all of these extra areas added onto the map. That being the High Peak Borough Council, which I did jokingly say in the last episode that they were annoyed Buxton wasn't in the Peak District as a prod towards their marketing campaign, which they're always saying the town is a part of. The High Peak area actually does include some villages like Hayfield and Chinley that wouldn't be out of place in the national park, and I see why someone would label it as the Peaks. But the idea of the Peak District being more than the national park does intrigue me. I've never heard of that before. To me, it is just the national park, and all I can find online is, well, sort of just that. There has to be some kind of reason in history why so many people refer to different areas by the name of the peaks, without any solid boundaries, borders or signs. Originally, looking up at documents and websites for an answer to people's comments for the last episode, I thought people could be confusing the High Peak with the Peak District, or filling in the gap, which I understand. It looks a bit weird seeing the Peak District map with Buxton sitting in the middle like that, excluded and isolated. And although I have researched, I still couldn't tell you guys a definitive answer, so I'd love some comments down below on your thoughts about the boundaries, where it lies to you, what is the Peak District to yourself, or any idea where the larger Peak District boundary came from. Was it marketing from the High Peak, or was it an old plan for the park before it was drawn up? I'd love to know your thoughts. And one final thing before the cleanup part of the video. There's some interesting sections I noticed while I was making this video, the national park boundary, that I found, such as Tunstead Quarry. Its main blasting section of the quarry is actually across the border, onto the national park side. And Glossop is excluded from the park with a radius coming from the centre of the town, not using natural markers, roads or council boundaries, just like Buxton's carved out of. It was just interesting. And in this episode I cleaned up one wheelbarrow full of rubbish from Ashwood, which annoyingly had lots of tiny little bits of plastic, thanks to Alliance Environmental mowing without litter picking prior. Oh, and it's been 3 months since I last did it, so I've donated blood again, and I highly recommend for people to do so if you are fit and able to. I'll leave a link down below on how you're supposed to give blood correctly. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, ta-ra.